year was 1883, and the Oregon coast wore winter like a shroud. A rare blizzard had rolled in from the north, covering pine-covered cliffs and battered shorelines in snow deeper than a man's boot. Folks along Tillamook Bay said it hadn't snowed like that in 20 years, and wouldn't again for 20 more. But on one frozen afternoon, with waves pounding like drums against ice-rimmed rocks, a woman and her children walked that lonely stretch of coast, and they weren't looking back. Her name was Hannah Mercer. 30 years old, and already weathered, more lost than many twice her age. Her hands were cracked, her shawl threadbare, and her steps, though faltering, never stopped. Not with 3 little souls depending on her. There was Isaac, her eldest, 10 years old and too quiet for a boy that age. He walked a half step ahead, jaw clenched like he could hold the cold back through will alone. Rosie, 8, clung to his sleeve, her scarf slipping as snow kissed her hair, and little Theo, just 5, whimpered behind them, clutching his mother's hand with a tiny red hand wrapped in ice-stiff mittens. Hannah's breath came in ragged clouds. Her legs burned. Every whisper to keep going cracked her lips further. But she pushed forward through snow and wind and silence, because turning back meant giving up, and she'd already lost too much. She thought of Daniel, the man who left them in that inland town with a sneer and a sack of near-empty flour. "You'll figure it out, Hannah," he said. "You always do." She still heard his voice in the dark, that coward's charm still sour in her mouth. And maybe that's why she didn't stop when her knees buckled, why she didn't turn when Rosie cried she was too tired to go on, why she only pointed forward, toward a faint flicker of light in the distance, half hidden behind trees and snowfall. "There," she rasped. "Just a little more." That light belonged to Caleb Ward, a fisherman, a man who'd lived alone for near 6 years in a shack built of sea timber and silence. He hadn't planned to save anyone that night. Most nights, he barely saved himself. But when the knock came, once, twice, 3 times, Caleb stood from his stool by the fire and listened. The door creaked as it opened, and there they were. 1 woman and 3 children, wrapped in frost and desperation. Hannah looked up, eyes hollow with fear, but unflinching. Caleb said nothing, neither did she, not at first, because some moments don't need words, especially when the cold's already stolen your voice. Caleb stepped aside. "Get in." And they did. Inside the cabin, the world was warmer, but no less silent. Fire popped in the hearth, casting flickers across the log walls. The smell of salt, smoke, and drying nets clung to every beam. The sea whispered just beyond the window, slow, steady, like it knew better than to shout. Caleb Ward stood like driftwood brought in by tide, weathered, grounded, and shaped by something older than time. He said nothing as Hannah helped the children inside. Theo whimpered. Rosie's lips were blue. Isaac didn't complain, but his shoulders sagged the moment the door closed behind them. Caleb latched it with a thick iron bolt, then moved to the stove. He added wood, stirred coals, poured water into a rusted kettle. "Sit by the fire," he said. "You'll thaw faster." Hannah did as told, too tired to argue. She wrapped her arms around Theo, who curled into her like a pup in snow. Rosie leaned against Isaac, eyes fluttering shut. Caleb handed them blankets from a nearby trunk, thick, woolen, and heavy with the scent of pine. "Ain't much," he muttered, "but better than outside." He poured water into tin mugs and dropped in a few herbs from a jar. The brew smelled sharp, warming. Hannah took the cup with shaking hands. She stared into the steam as if it might speak. Caleb sat at the edge of the room, near the fishing gear. Hooks, nets, floats, everything a man needs to brave a storm or be taken by one. Finally, he asked, "You come from the east?" Hannah nodded, voice thin. 3 days. Pine Hollow. Lost the wagon after the last ridge. Caleb didn't blink. He knew Pine Hollow, knew how little mercy it offered. "Why come this far?" he asked. She hesitated, then stared into her cup. "Because he left. Said he'd bring back work. Brought back nothing. And then, he just stopped coming back." Caleb looked into the fire. The logs snapped. "That's a bad way to go," he said softly. "Leaving before the season breaks." Hannah looked at him, then really looked. for the first time. You live out here alone? 6 winters. Caleb replied. Sea gives. Sea takes. I take what's left. She wanted to ask more, but the fire had started to lull her. Her limbs felt like sand, sinking into warmth. I'm Hannah, she murmured. Caleb. She motioned to the children. That's Isaac, Rosie, and Theo. Caleb's eyes paused on the boy. Isaac, who hadn't spoken a word, just watched, guarded and still. Something in Caleb's expression softened. Briefly, he nodded once. You're safe here, he said. Storm's got nowhere to go tonight. Neither do you. And in that single sentence, something cracked open between them. Not broken, but thawing. The sun didn't rise so much as it crept across the sky, veiled behind gray clouds and the hush of coastal snow. It was the kind of morning that looked quiet, but carried the weight of all that had come before. Inside the cabin, the fire burned steady. The children slept in a tangle of blankets, their breath soft and slow, the way only the safe sleep. Hannah stirred. She sat up stiffly from the floor beside the hearth and looked at them. Theo's cheek against her skirt, Rosie curled near the coals, Isaac propped like a soldier beside the door. She stood, rubbed her hands against her sleeves, and turned toward the window. Outside, Caleb was already up. He hauled driftwood and split pine, his axe thudding through the snow-packed earth in rhythm. Salt wind tugged at his coat. He didn't look up. Hannah pulled on her boots and stepped out. The cold stung her cheeks. You don't have to do all that, she said. Caleb didn't pause. Stove, don't care who's cold. It just needs feeding. She crossed to the woodpile and began stacking logs into her arms. He glanced at her once. That was all. And just like that, they worked together. Later, they ate beside the stove. Salted fish, black bread, and tea that tasted more of smoke than spice. It wasn't much, but it filled the silence without apology. That afternoon, the snow eased just enough for Hannah and the children to walk into the village, barely more than a scatter of shingled rooftops by the bluff. Inside the shop, Rosie showed the old keeper her shell whistle. He smiled, wide and wrinkled. Your little one's got charm, he told Hannah. And I've seen Caleb for years, but I never seen him carve a seal for anyone before. At the bakery, Sadie handed Hannah 2 warm rolls without asking for coin. He's changing, she said. That man's been alone too long. Maybe it's time he wasn't. Back in the cabin, Caleb sat by the fire. Isaac watched him work a fishing net, fingers deft and slow. How do you know where to fish? Isaac asked. Caleb glanced over. You listen to the water. She don't shout, just speaks quiet. Isaac nodded like he understood, even if he didn't. Theo sat at Caleb's feet, playing with the seal carving. Rosie pressed her ear to her shell. It sounds like the sea, she whispered. That's because it remembers, Caleb said. That night, after the children were asleep, Caleb handed Hannah a tin of boiled water and sat beside her. You've been alone a long time, she said. He nodded, thought it was the only way to keep from losing again. She looked over at him, the fire casting warm lines across her face. And now? Caleb didn't speak right away, just stared into the flames. Now, I'm not so sure, but I see how they look at you, how you hold them together like you were born to do it. She smiled softly. I'm just trying not to fall apart. He leaned back. You're fixing something in this house, Hannah, he said. And it ain't just the mittens. And for the first time, Hannah let herself laugh. Quiet, tired, but real. Winter clung to the world, but its grip had loosened. The snow no longer fell with rage. It drifted now, quiet as dust, resting on the sea like lace on old skin. Inside the cabin, the days began to take on a rhythm, one stitched together by the small, steady rituals of people trying to belong to something again. Each morning, Caleb rose before the children stirred. He lit the fire and walked the shore for driftwood. Sometimes Isaac followed, boots crunching in the crusted snow, hands stuffed in his sleeves. Caleb showed him how to tie knots, how to patch nets, how to feel the winds shift before the clouds gave it away. You can't fight the sea, he said once. You just learn how to move with it. Isaac took in every word like scripture. Later, Caleb handed Isaac a short fishing rod. Hand-carved. The handle sanded smooth. "Yours now," he said. "Made it for my girl once. Lucy. She never got to use it." Isaac didn't ask questions, just nodded, reverent. At the cove, Caleb showed him how to cast, how to listen. The sea, soft and glassy, lapped at the shore with a hush that felt like forgiveness. "She used to say it smelled like stories," Caleb murmured. Isaac glanced at him. "Your daughter?" Caleb nodded. "A storm took her. And her mother. Both. One boat. One day." Isaac didn't speak. He just pressed the rod into the sand, then sat beside him. Sometimes silence is the best kind of answer. Back home, Rosie practiced her whistle, puffing soft notes between bites of dried apple. Theo held the seal like a secret treasure, lining up shells in rows across the hearth. Hannah cleaned dishes with Caleb's help, the two working in wordless coordination. Later, when the light dimmed, Caleb watched the children huddle around Hannah as she read from an old, water-damaged book. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He didn't speak, but he smiled, just a little. That night, as the fire dwindled, Caleb sat outside under a bruised sky. In his hands, he held Clara's scarf, faded now, but still soft at the edges. He thought of Lucy's laugh, of how she once danced barefoot in the surf. He stared at the sea, breathing slow. "I don't know if I can do this again," he whispered. "Don't know if I can lose again." But inside, he heard Rosie's giggle, Theo murmuring in sleep, Isaac's quiet humming, and he realized he already had something to lose, which meant it was worth everything to protect. By the 5th week, the cold had settled into bones and habits. The snow still fell in fits, but the worst of the storm had passed. What remained was quiet. Watchful, Caleb noticed it first. The sound of hoofbeats, not rushed, not panicked, just deliberate, measured, like a man who believed the world would always wait for him. He stood on the porch, coat buttoned tight, rifle nearby but untouched. Behind him, Hannah stepped into the doorway, children peeking past her shawl. A rider crested the trail. Then another. The man in front wore a fine coat and a confident sneer. His eyes scanned the cabin like it owed him something. Daniel Mercer. Hannah's breath caught. Her fingers tightened around Theo's shoulder. "Afternoon," Daniel called. "Long way from Pine Hollow, aren't you, Hannah?" She stepped forward. "Daniel, you didn't think I'd come after you?" She said nothing. Caleb stood at her side now, silent as a pillar. Daniel dismounted. The second man, a wiry figure with a badge, followed. Harbor Constable Rowe. Daniel pulled a paper from his coat. "Glenvale court clerk signed this. Says I've got legal custody, and I plan to collect." Rowe shifted. His eyes flicked toward Caleb, toward the children, then back at the snow-covered trail. He didn't look eager to be there. "You left us," Hannah said. "No food, no coin, just a door swinging in the wind." Daniel shrugged. "I had business. Real opportunities. You just didn't understand." His gaze shifted to Caleb. "And who's this? Some lonely beach rat you've shacked up with?" Caleb's voice was low, steady. "Man who opened the door when yours stayed shut." Daniel smirked. "You've got until tomorrow to say goodbye. I'll be back, with more ink, and more names behind it." He turned, mounted, and rode off, leaving only boot prints and frostbite behind. Rowe hesitated, then followed. The cabin was hushed like a chapel. Rosie and Theo huddled under quilts. Isaac sat by the door again, staring into the dying light. Hannah held the folded court paper in her lap. She hadn't opened it. Didn't need to. Caleb stood nearby, silent. "He'll come back," she said. "With more than paper next time. Then we'll be ready," Caleb answered. But even as he said it, his fingers brushed the edge of the window frame. Old wood, weather-worn. He didn't say what he was thinking, that a storm inside a man could be harder to brace for than one that came from the sky. Night fell heavy after Daniel's visit. The sea was louder now, crashing against the rocks like a warning. The cold outside pressed close to the windows, but inside the cabin, it wasn't just winter that chilled the room. It was fear. Theo curled up in Hannah's lap, Rosie lay awake, eyes fixed on the rafters. Isaac sat stiff, still holding the fishing rod Caleb had given him, like it was a sword instead of a gift. Caleb stood at the hearth, staring into the flames. Hannah broke the silence first. "He'll come back." Caleb nodded once, with a badge, with more threats. Still, he said nothing. "You don't have to stand in the middle of this," she whispered. Now he looked at her, really looked. "I'm not just standing in it," he said. "I'm staying." Later, while the others slept, Caleb stepped outside. The snow had crusted to a thin shell, gleaming under moonlight. He sat on the edge of the porch and unwrapped a worn scarf. Clara's. His fingers traced its fraying edges. The sea rumbled softly in the distance. It didn't rage tonight. It whispered, like it was listening. "Clara," he murmured. "I thought I'd buried all this with you. Thought I'd locked the door so tight I'd never feel again. But they're here, and I don't know if I can do this." He bowed his head. Then, the cabin door creaked open. Isaac stepped out, wrapped in his blanket. "Can't sleep?" Caleb didn't look up. "No." The boy sat beside him. For a long time, they said nothing, just watched the stars through bare trees. Finally, Isaac asked, "Were you scared when the storm took them?" Caleb's voice was quiet. "I wasn't scared until it was over. That's when it hit." Isaac looked up at him. "I was scared when Ma said we had to walk. I thought we'd die out there. But we didn't. 'Cause of you." Caleb met the boy's eyes. And in that look, something old and heavy cracked, not broken, just open. The villagers came early. Mr. Bird brought tools to reinforce the door. Sadie brought bread. Others came just to stand in the snow and nod. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. They were saying, "We've seen what's right, and we'll stand by it." And Caleb, once a man made only of silence and storms, stood tall beside them, not to block the past, but to protect the future. The sky turned gray again, but not with snow, with tension, with waiting. They heard him coming just after noon, hoofbeats cracking through the crusted snow, echoing off the trees. One rider, then two. Daniel Mercer returned, his coat still too fine, his eyes still sharp, but there was something different in his posture. Less fire, more pressure, and this time, he wasn't the only one watching. Caleb stood on the porch, arms folded. Beside him, Hannah, firm and steady. Behind them, Rosie and Theo watched from the window. Isaac stood just in front of them, jaw tight, shoulders set. Daniel dismounted, holding the court order like a sword he didn't quite know how to swing. The constable followed, but slower this time, uneasy. "We're not here to fight," Daniel said. "Just here to do what's lawful." Caleb didn't move. "You brought law. We brought truth." And then, from behind the trees, figures emerged. Sadie, Mr. Bird, the pastor, others, villagers who had seen more winters than they cared to count. Each stood silent, but firm. Not one held a weapon, but none looked ready to back down either. The constable froze, caught between a piece of paper and the weight of the people behind it. Daniel's confidence slipped. He looked to Hannah. "They're mine," he said. "I raised them." Hannah's voice was clear. "You left them, and we survived without you." Daniel's eyes flicked to Isaac, but it was the boy who spoke next. "You don't get to call yourself our father." Rosie stepped beside her brother, eyes wide but strong. "We already have one now." Theo, clutching his seal, nodded solemnly. Daniel opened his mouth, but no words came. Just the sound of the wind brushing through trees and a single gull crying out above the sea. He turned to the constable. "Do something." Rose shook his head slowly. "They're not going with you, Mercer." And just like that, Daniel got back on his horse. He didn't say another word. He didn't look back. The day after Daniel left, the sea was calm. Not quiet, but calm. The waves rolled slow and steady, like the earth itself had exhaled. And in the cabin by the cove, something else had shifted too. Theo woke first and ran barefoot to the hearth, shouting for firewood like a soldier on duty. Rosie followed, her shell whistle chirping its crooked tune as she danced across the floor in her mismatched socks. Isaac helped Caleb with the netting again, this time not just watching, but tying, patching. working with hands that knew their place. Caleb corrected his grip once, gently. You got it. Now pull slow, like you're easing it through water. Isaac grinned. Think I'm ready to fish for real? Caleb nodded. Then we'll go together. Next tide. Hannah kneaded bread in the kitchen corner. The rhythm steady, her sleeves dusted in flour. She glanced at Caleb across the room. It's louder in here, she said. Caleb looked around. Sounds like life. Sounds like home. That night, after the fire was low and the children had drifted into sleep, Isaac stayed awake. He walked to Caleb, who sat oiling a reel. Hey, Isaac hesitated. Can I ask something? Caleb paused, waiting. Is it okay if I call you something different now? Caleb looked up, eyes searching the boy's face. What'd you have in mind? Isaac glanced at his siblings, then back again. Pa, he said softly. The word didn't echo. It settled, like an anchor dropping steady and sure. Caleb didn't say anything at first. He just reached out, placed a hand on Isaac's shoulder, and nodded. And Isaac smiled. Not wide, just right. The snow hadn't vanished. It still clung to the corners of the fields, the shadows beneath the trees, but its hold was weaker now, like a memory not yet ready to let go. One morning, as the mist hung low over the shore, Caleb spotted a lone rider coming down the trail. No badge, no second horse, just a man riding slow, shoulders bent under a weight. Only he could feel. Daniel Mercer. Hannah stepped outside, not afraid. Isaac stood beside her. Rosie and Theo peered from the window but didn't run. Caleb waited, silent, still. Daniel stopped a dozen paces from the porch, dismounted slowly. He held nothing in his hands, not a weapon, not a paper. I came to say something, he said. No one interrupted. I thought, if I brought back a claim, a paper, some law behind my voice, maybe I could fix it all. Maybe that'd be enough. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded note, creased and yellowed. I wrote this to you once, Hannah. Never sent it. Couldn't. Figured I'd do better showing up with something to offer instead. He let out a bitter laugh. Turns out I still came empty-handed. Hannah's face didn't change, but her voice softened, just enough. We're not yours to fix anymore, Daniel. Daniel nodded. I know, and I don't blame you, but I needed to see it. For real. One last time. He looked at Isaac, who met his eyes with a calm, quiet strength. Then at Caleb, who didn't flinch, didn't gloat, just stood. Daniel tucked the letter away, mounted his horse, and turned down the trail. He didn't ask forgiveness, didn't expect it, and this time, he didn't look back. Spring came in small steps, not all at once but slow and honest. The snow melted in patches. The earth turned dark and rich beneath it. Buds began to nudge from bare branches, and gulls circled lower, drawn by the shifting tide. Inside the cabin, things changed too. Not with fanfare, but with rhythm. Theo no longer clung to Hannah's leg at night. Rosie sang while she worked, her shell whistle now hanging from a string beside the window like a wind chime. Isaac spent hours at the cove with Caleb, hauling nets, casting lines, watching the sea with a kind of peace in his eyes. One morning, they brought back a full catch. Caleb showed Isaac how to clean and sort, his hands steady over the slick scales. She'd be proud of you, he said, almost to himself. Isaac looked up. Your daughter? Caleb nodded. Lucy. She had eyes just like Rosie's, brave like you. They didn't need more words, just the sun overhead and the sea rolling soft. That night, the lantern above the cabin door flickered to life. Caleb's hands lighting it out of habit. But this time, it wasn't for warning ships. It wasn't to ward off the dark. It was just home. Inside, Hannah baked fresh bread. Theo played with a wooden boat Caleb had carved. Rosie hummed softly as she sorted dried herbs. Isaac sat by the fire, whittling a new reel handle, Caleb beside him. Hannah stepped out onto the porch as the sky turned gold over the sea. Caleb joined her, arms folded, watching the waves breathe in and out like they always had. You still lighting that lantern for the sea? She asked. He shook his head. No, I light it so you can always find your way home. She looked up at him then, eyes steady, gentle. "We're not surviving anymore, Caleb." He met her gaze, something old and weathered in his face softening. "No," he said. "We're living." There was a beat of silence, not awkward, just full. Then Hannah reached up and whispered, "Thank you for opening the door that night." Caleb didn't reply. He simply leaned down, slow and sure, and pressed his forehead against hers. For a breath, that was enough. Then, he kissed her. Soft, honest, not the start of something, but the proof it had already begun. And when they pulled apart, nothing more needed to be said. They stood there a while, Hannah and Caleb, bathed in the lantern's glow, as the sea whispered below and the stars settled above. Inside, the laughter hadn't stopped. Rosie had convinced Theo to join her in a clumsy little dance. Isaac played soft notes on a string Caleb had tuned that morning. The home they had built, quietly, piece by piece, now rang with life. Caleb opened the door and held it for Hannah. She stepped through, smiling, her hand grazing his one last time as she passed. He followed and let the door close behind them, not to keep the world out, but to hold their world in. Later that night, as the fire faded to coals and the sea rolled on steady, Isaac climbed into bed with Rosie and Theo. He didn't need to stand guard at the door anymore. The storms had passed. The silence was safe. Outside, the lantern still burned, casting its light not for lost ships or sailors, but for a family found at the edge of the world. And that's how they stayed. Not just surviving, but living. Together.